Three.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. I am very privileged today to be able to bring on my good friend, Julio Carvalho. Julio is a practicing psychotherapist and an international speaker. He goes around giving lectures on philosophy and religion and how to live a better life in general. So welcome, Julio. It's so great to have you.
The pleasure's mine, Chris. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, thank you. How about you?
Good to see you, my friend. Always a pleasure. I'm doing great.
Excellent. Excellent. So I figure we'll go ahead and jump in because we have a very interesting question to go over today. That this is a question that we got from one of Dennis Prager's fireside chats, where a lady called in and asked him, why was one of her children born with a birth defect? And I think that's a question that a lot of people have, a lot of probably religious people and people that are skeptical of religion, is why would a just God allow some children to be born with terrible birth defects and other children to be born perfectly normal? And I suppose along with that, there's a lot of other questions about, why are some children born into poverty while others are born into riches, and all these things that really don't square very well with this idea of a just God.
I hear you, my friend. Well, first of all, I admire very much the work of Dennis Prager. I believe he does fantastic work to spread logic, reasoning, love through his wisdom. I respect very much his work. However, I believe his worldview definitely limits some of his ability to answer these kind of questions. And his worldview is we only have one single lifetime. We're born once, we die once, and that's it. Well, I am a personal, strong believer of the multiple opportunities point of view. In another word, we are eternal individuals and we are immortal individuals, and we get many opportunities to come back on this physical plane as many times as we need in order to evolve. So let's begin with the notion that we have a mission, and the mission is to better ourselves intellectually and morally. As a result, everything that we do definitely creates our future. Our today's action shapes our future. So children that you see who are born with birth defects, let's keep in mind that we are under the guide, under the love, under the laws of a just supreme being who created all of us. And these disparities that you see, healthy and unhealthy, poor and rich, intelligent and ignorant, these opposites in life, they all have an explanation in the reincarnation point of view explanation. So everything that we do to ourselves definitely has a consequence in our future life. So the child that has been born with a birth defect, first of all, it's not someone who was created when the woman's was fertilized by by her husband. This is someone who is an immortal spirit and has lived many existences before. So that birth defect, it's actually an opportunity for that individual to make amends for their past mistakes. And they have an opportunity not only to make amends, but to better themselves. And eventually they will be born again with a healthy body. One thing that we must be very clear, that these difficult beginnings, being born with a birth defect, it's definitely not a punishment from God, but rather an educational process, which is very painful, just because the individual who actually was born in that condition, unfortunately, because of their own misuse of their free will, the consequences they created for themselves, it's that painful beginning. However, this is not punishment, but rather a painful educational process, which eventually will help that individual to grow and to change their ways of thinking, to change their minds. And later in a different reincarnation, they will receive a perfect body. Now, for the mom and the father who are involved in that scenario, that's because they have connection with that individual from previous reincarnations. So this is not an accident on these individuals' hands, and they should be proud of themselves, because those who are entitled with receiving that kind of children in their hands, that's because God trusts them with their strength, with their resilience, in order to guide that spirit to the correct path again. So this is one of the explanations why people are born with birth defect.
Okay, so I understand that. I mean, that certainly makes sense from a reincarnationist point of view. But is that just kind of like wishful thinking that, it would be nice if there were past lives, because that would be a convenient explanation? Or do you like, are there better reasons to believe in that?
Well, the premises of understanding that reincarnation is a reality in our lives, it's actually the definition that we give of God, and especially God's attributes. We say that God is an almighty, all perfect being, an all just individual. Now, what does all just means? That means that we treat everyone equally. That's what all just means. Now, when we look at life, do we see people being treated justly from the beginning? No, we don't. What do we see? We see disparities. We see people who are born poor and other people are born rich. We see people who are born sick and other people healthy. We see certain individuals who are intellectually advanced right from the get-go, and other people who are born ignorant. They have very limited intellectual abilities.
Okay, so if I get what you're saying, it's sort of that if God is just, then there must have been something before that disparity in the situation, right? There must be some reason that before that the one kid is born healthy and the one is born sick, right? It must be a cause and effect relationship somehow. And for that to be the case, there must have been something before that physical lifetime.
Hey, Chris, let's think of the alternative. What would be the alternative? If someone is born intelligent and we remove God out of the equation, we remove the law of cause and effect out of the equation, there's none of that. So what we left with are just luck and bad luck, which what's the definition of being lucky and unlucky? So someone who's born very smart, they what they can attribute their intelligence to their genes. So this is not the result of their own effort. It was purely out of chance that they were born with those special genes that made them smart. And someone who was born with a birth defect, this is pure out of luck. That's the only reason why they were born with those birth defects. There are certain people that I admire very much, their intellect. You have Carl Sagan, for example, and you have Neil deGrasse. And I've read some of their biography, I've watched their videos, and there are sections of their video, Chris, that they're literally say, I had the fortunate of having parents who brought me to the museum all the time, and that awoke my curiosity. So although I respect these individuals very much, I'm listening to what they're saying, and they're using the word fortunate. What does being fortunate means? It means that you're lucky. So the only reason why they went on that path, which led them to being known throughout the world, is just because they had the right set of parents who took them to the right places to awaken their curiosity. The same thing with Carl Sagan. He uses the phrase, I was lucky to have the parents I had, because they inspired me to pursue my intellectual ambition. So that's it. So all you have, it's luck or unluck. Now, and that's if you are a materialistic point of view individual. And so
Right.
what that means, all your achievements in life, you can attribute to being lucky or unlucky.
Right.
And for those who are spiritualists, they believe in something else beyond their body, and they believe in a higher power of some sort. The explanation from the one single existence point of view, it leads them to conclude that God is very unjust. God
Mm-hmm.
has given some children the very advanced intellect, other children who are not so smart, and what that has to do with our future. Well, individuals who are born very smart, the chances of them making all right financially are better than those who lack the intellectual skills for them to make a good living for themselves. Not even to mention those who are born completely healthy and have a full body that is highly functional, and other people who are limited in what they can do. So if they believe in a God, and they believe in just in one existence, they must conclude that God is very unjust. And let me just add that some people will say, well, it's not the child's fault, but the parents' fault, because they used drugs, they did something, or their grandparents gave them bad gene. So that will make God even a worse of a God, because that means I am being punished for someone else's mistake. I worked in the jail system for 12 years. And, to think that someone will go to prison for someone else's mistake, everyone would look at the judge and said, you are making a huge mistake here. You cannot send that guy to prison because of the other guy's fault. We are responsible for our own actions, and reincarnation explains that we are the architect of our own future with what we do with our own lives.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, especially today when our society is so much into this victim culture. It reminds me of, I read that book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell a long time ago, which if you don't know the book, the premise is basically that people that succeed in life succeed just because they got lucky. And it's kind of ridiculous looking back on it. And he gives some examples of like the successful professional hockey players in Canada were the ones that were born towards the beginning of the year, because they get started when they're really young, and the older boys are a little bit bigger than the younger boys, and so they end up getting all the way to the big leagues. And so I see that, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine for noticing specific trends, but is it possible that somebody who has that success orientation, let's say, or somebody who's motivated, is going to find a circumstance, or is going to find an opportunity that works for them, right? And if it's not hockey, then it's something else. So I guess where I was going with that is yeah, we have this idea that everything, that circumstances just happen to us, and what you're proposing is radically the opposite of that, is that even the circumstances that we think are just happening to us are actually of our own doing in some way. Is that accurate?
Well, let's delve in first into what you said about, Mr. Gladwell. So he talks about on the individual level. There's also one of the greatest economists of our time, Thomas Sowell. And, he actually talks about countries on the same way that Gladwell talks about individual. He says that certain countries, they were almost bound to be rich because they had access to the sea. And because you have access to the sea, your commerce can grow, because now you can trade in with other countries. So that gives you an advantage, and it's just a geographical advantage. But from the reincarnation point of view, there are no advantages. We are constantly making our destiny by today's action. So let's say someone in a previous lifetime, in a previous existence, they have worked really hard on a skill, and yet they do not become successful with that skill, and they die. Well, it's the body that have died, not the individual who actually learn the skill. For example, let's say someone wanted to become a car race driver. So that individual will learn how to race in that particular car. Eventually, the car will break down. Once the car breaks down, the racer did not lose his skills. He will use his skills with the new car that he will purchase. So the same thing here. It's the mind, it's the individual, it's the soul, the spirit. I don't mind which terminology we use to identify there's something beyond your physical body that actually absorbs all the skills and conserves all the knowledge that you gain. So from the spiritist perspective, we call that the spirit. I know that has a very large cultural baggage that sometimes does more harm than good to identify and understanding these concepts. But for the sake of knowledge, we use the word spirit to identify the thinking being that that learns and conserves the skills. So when that person loses their body through the process we call death, the individual didn't die. It was just a biological machine that died. And on their next opportunity, all those skills they have learned, they didn't lose them. So this will be a child who will be very precocious. This is a child who would actually, from the get-go, like to race cars, so they race with their toys. And eventually they'll get a little bike and they're racing their bike. And you see that this child has been prone to racing from the get-go. People look at that child and say, well, this child has a natural talent for racing. Well, that word talent, it's nothing but the result of their previous efforts in previous reincarnations. So the same applies to Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse. These individuals were not born smart because they inherited, and they had the fortunate of inheriting good genes. These individuals worked their intellect in previous reincarnations, and now they just continue on their path of their intellectual progress and growth. And the same principle applies for everything in our life, our finances. So when Gladwell talks about these individuals who were lucky to be born in a certain time of the year, and that led them to a perfect scenario for them to become successful hockey players, that was not an accident. These are individuals who worked themselves on a previous reincarnation to actually merit to be born in those circumstances in order for them to be successful in those areas. So there's no blessings, there's no natural talents. All you have are the result of hard work. So no room for victimization through the process, through the lenses of the reincarnation point of view.
Interesting. So I could see how that would ruffle a lot of feathers. Like a lot of people would think, oh, well, no, you're blaming me for my circumstances. Like I'm the victim here. There's nothing I could have done about this. That's that might be a tough pill to swallow for some people. I mean, even when it's clearly true that the person did cause their situation in this life, not even talking about a past life, a lot of times people want to claim the victim role. So then
Yes.
trying to get people to accept that they might have done something in a past life, that's even that might be even more difficult.
Well, it's their use of their free will. If they want to
Right.
continue to see themselves perceiving themselves as victims, why people choose to be a victim. From the psychological point of view, it's very convenient because all it takes for me to be a victim, it's to have an indicator finger working. You did this to me.
Yeah.
I'm a failure because of you or the state or my grandparents or my ex-wife, my ex-husband. Somebody did something to me, and this is why I am who I am. Now, when I do this, Chris, I immediately become weak. If there's a fact of life, there is no such a thing as a strong victims. All victims are very weak. So if you're listening to us, and probably some of you may have been groomed to see yourself as a victim, think that the first disadvantage of being a victim is that you become immediately weak. Now, why do you do so? Well, you are weak if you're a victim, because when we are a victim, the solution, it's someone else. It's my ex-husband, my ex-wife, my neighbor, my enemy, my ex-boss. Somebody did something to me.
Right. And
And
let me stop you for a second. I
go
noticed you
ahead.
said the solution, right? Because if you're pointing the finger at somebody else and saying the problem is that person, well, then the solution also lies with that person, right? And not with yourself. It's a very disempowering view of life, in my opinion.
My friend, you hit the nail right on it. That's exactly why. If you take the car to the mechanic and the mechanic says to you, the cause of the problem is the alternator. What's the solution? To change the alternator. So
Right.
if I believe that my problem is my ex-wife, my ex-husband, my enemy, I'm expecting these people to change in order for my life to improve. And
Right.
when that's going to happen? Never.
Well, maybe, but you don't hold your breath.
Well, the people do change, Chris. Don't get me wrong, but they change for themselves,
Yeah, of
not to
course.
please us. So if
Right.
I see myself
Especially
as
your
a
ex.
victim and I'm expecting someone to change for my life to improve, all I'm doing, my friend, I am prolonging my misery. That's all I'm doing. So it's from that alone, it's not a wise thing to do, to be a victim.
Right. Yeah, I agree completely. And I love this. I've kind of started to take on for myself this idea of extreme ownership, that literally looking at everything that happens in my life as it's my fault. In a way, right? And sometimes like somebody betrays you, somebody does something bad to you. And and I think it's not what you're saying, that if somebody does something evil to you, then that person doesn't have any fault, right? It's just looking at what is your side of it? What is your responsibility in this? How could I have made this situation different? Because even if the other person really did act wrongly towards you, there's almost always there's something that you could have done better. At least speaking for myself, making a lot of mistakes and a lot of things.
You said very interesting things, but let me just begin by saying that words create emotions. So one word I would definitely avoid when analyzing myself is the word fault. It's
Sure.
because it simply uh, um, it summarizes this process of self-analysis to who is to blame. But that's not
Mhm.
the goal here. It's not who's to blame, but on whose hand the solution lies.
Right,
And
right.
so in
Good
order
point.
for me to know that, I must know who actually created the problem. So it's not just a question of blame, but in what way have I contributed to this situation? And when I have the wisdom to do that, and this, my friend, is what we call being responsible. So the word responsible here, what we have is the suffix able, and then the root of the word response. So
Mhm.
to be responsible means that we able to provide a response. That's what being responsible. And so when I am a responsible individual, I am able to provide a logical, reasonable explanation for what's going on with me. And when I have the wisdom, when I have the knowledge, and most importantly, when I have the courage, because this literally takes courage
Oh
to
yeah.
see that I am the cause of my problem. Everything else now changes because I immediately, with that self perception, I become strong. And
Right.
why? Well, if I am the cause of the problem, I must be the solution to the problem. Can I
Exactly.
tell myself what to do? Yes. As a victim, if I point to other people as being the cause of my problem, can I tell these individuals what to do? I mean, I can. Are they going to listen to me? No, they will not. So there are so many instances in which there is so much that we can do, yet this self paralyzing perception of seeing ourselves as being a victim, it makes people and makes ourselves so weak that we become blind to the little and details and things that are right there before our eyes. We don't see it because it's conveniently for us to see ourselves as being the victim.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I want to kind of clarify a little bit too, to my point, that saying that it's you're the cause of the problem is not to exonerate the other person. Maybe the other person did something really horrible to you, and it's just, what could you have done to maybe avoid being in that situation in the first place? What could you have done to avoid being close to that person? Maybe did you trust somebody that should not have been trusted? And when you look back at that and stop, even if their problem is this big and yours is this big, this is the part that you have control over. So it makes a lot more sense to focus on that part rather than the part that you have no control over. Right? Yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it, because chances are somebody does something wrong to me. Chances are that's not the last time that's going to happen. Probably I'm going to run into somebody else in life that's also going to be the same way, who's going to be inclined to do something wrong, that wrong against me, and I can either protect myself so it doesn't happen in the first place, or I can respond better to it in some way so that I don't suffer as much.
Your comment, it's excellent. And it creates so many different variables for the same question. This would be an excellent part of people to actually write down on the comment section questions that they have about specific problems of them being hurt by other people. Because right. You're 100% correct. We live in a world through the Spiritist philosophy lenses. It's a world of trial and expiation. So what that means, you have a combination of people who are good, people who wants to advance, people who are very stubborn, and people who are evil. Now, these individuals who are evil, they were not created evil. They are temporarily evil, because all of us were created simple and ignorant, and we're walking towards imperfection. So my definition of evil, it's someone that currently takes pleasure in inflicting on someone else's pain. And the contemplation of them seeing someone else suffer because of the pain they have produced on them slowly alleviates their own pain that they're going through. Obviously, this is false, because you cannot alleviate your own pain by creating other people's pain. So having said that, yes, there are certain individuals who are evil and do bad things to us. But in my profession, how many individuals I have attended to that I have provided psychotherapy whose pain was inflicted on them 25 years ago? And the pain that was inflicted on them, it was on a specific date. They would tell me, this was April 17 at 9:00 at night, this person did this to me. And it happened back in 2010. All right. So now my take is, well, this individual did this horrible thing to you on that date. I would like to know, what have you done to yourself after that date? On April 18th and April 19th and April 20th. And that's where people don't realize that when I remind myself of what others have done to me, I am reliving that pain, Chris. So whenever I think of the harm someone did to me, I am going through that pain again. That individual who has harmed me, that person is not next to me. They are not reharming me. Probably they are somewhere having fun in Cancun. That person does not even think of my existence. But here I am, maintaining a live picture of the pain they have inflicted on me. And the result of that, I am re-inflicting the pain on myself. So it's not a wise thing to do. And that's where I'm telling you that in that sense, we are the cause and the producer and the maintenance of the pain that we inflict on ourselves.
Right. So it's the first time it was the other person's doing, but every time after that, it's you doing it to yourself.
Yes. For example, think of a punch. Someone punched me 10 years ago. That was back in 2013. Mm-hmm. What I did with the memory of that punch on the following day, now it's completely up to me. Right. What I have done with that memory 1 year back in 2014 with the memory of that punch, that is completely up to me. So the actual physical punch, I just got it once. But because I decided, and this is a decision that we make, unfortunately, it's an unconscious decision, but people decide to maintain the hatred, to maintain the animosity and the pain. I have punched myself, if I just remembered, once per day, more than 3,650 times. That would be 365 punches times 10 years. So I just got one punch, yet I punched myself all over again. So this is where we conduct seminars on the topic of forgiveness for people to understand how liberating forgiveness is once you understand what is forgiveness.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and I like that. I like putting a number on it because it really makes me think about, oh man, if I've been that stupid, I've been punching myself every day for the last 3,000 days.
Yes, yes. Not to mention, Chris, whoever have inflicted pain on me, it's been my personal experience that only unhappy people actually produce unhappiness on other people. So
Right.
here I am, allowing some disturbed, mentally, morally, emotionally ill person to control my life.
Right.
This is a person who I have given the power of my life to dictate how I'm supposed to feel 10 years later. So yes, it's definitely very stupid of me to allow this person to control me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to a comment you made. You said that this is coming from the Spiritist philosophy. When you say that, just for people who are not familiar with what that means, tell us what that means.
Okay. So the Spiritist philosophy as a body of knowledge was codified, in other words, was put together by an educator named Leon de Nizar-Hivail. His first name was Hippolyte. So later he adopted a pseudonym, Allan Kardec, and he composed the Spiritist philosophy. The Spiritist philosophy is made up of questions that he asked highly evolved individuals throughout time, and these individuals provided the answer. It's a very logical body of knowledge. Whenever we read, for example, the Spirit's book, we are not asked to believe in any of the information is there. We are given the information, and we are supposed to, as readers, to reconcile what we know of God with the knowledge that is being provided. So, for example, what you asked before, when we say that we know that God is all just, all explanations after that claim should reconcile with our notion of what a just God must be. For example, another attribute that we claim that God has is that God is all-knowing. What does all-knowing stands for? That means you have a pre-science. You have knowledge of everything that will happen. You know what the future will bring. If that's the case, then it doesn't make any sense to say that someone will go to hell. And why not? Well, if someone will go to hell, that means that the Almighty, the all-knowing, the supreme intelligence knew when he created that individual will make mistakes. And by making mistakes, that individual will eventually deserve hell. So the question is, if you're all good, all loving, why in the world would you create a spirit knowing that that spirit will make the mistakes to deserve hell? So the explanation does not reconcile with what we say of what God is. So either God is not all loving, or God does not know what he's doing, or God does not know what the future is. And if God does not know what the future is, then God is not all knowing. So the explanation must reconcile with the attribute of God. So indeed, God is all knowing, all loving, and no one goes to hell from the geographical point of view. People who make mistakes, God knows what those mistakes are. And those mistakes will lead that person to a path of pain and suffering. And that pain and suffering, it's not there as punishment, but rather an educational opportunity that it's very tough, but it's a way to awaken them. And that's where we get many chances, also known as reincarnation. And just because we have mentioned the word reincarnation, this has nothing to do with going back and reincarnating in the bodies of animals. No such a thing. We reincarnate always forward. Either we remain stationary on the same spiritual level, or we move forward through the process of reincarnation. So we're constantly making our choices. So that's what Spiritism is. So it's a combination of philosophy, because it tells us, it gives us a view of life. It's a love for knowledge. It's a way of conducting ourselves. And we also say that it's a science. That's what Allan Kardec says. It's not a science that we're looking, objects through telescopes and microscopes, and we're taking our experiments to the lab. It's a science in the understanding that there is a body of knowledge that studies the realm of the spiritual world, the nature of the spirits, and the relationship with us, the corporeal world. And once you understand the science and the philosophy, there's definitely ethical consequences to what you do. And so it has religious connotation. That's what people think of ethics, the distinguishment from right from wrong. So it gives us a body of knowledge in order to conduct ourselves, never telling us to be afraid of anything, but rather giving us the responsibility right on our laps, that what happens to us, it's what we do to ourselves.
Okay, gotcha. And just to clarify, this is all, it's coming from channeled material. So if you're familiar with like Abraham Hicks or the Law of One and the raw material, it's coming from the same source, but it takes it a step further. What Spiritism figured out essentially was that yes, we can communicate with the spirit world, and the man who brought it all together, it's called the codifier. He didn't create the religion, but he basically organized it. He brought disparate sources together. What he found was that he found people were talking with the spirits of the deceased. And as a science teacher, he was rather skeptical of that at first, but he proved beyond any reasonable doubt that it was really happening, and found that it was happening in many different places all at the same time, and basically figured out, okay, well, with this knowledge, what do we do with it? Right? We have all these communications that are coming to us at the same time. Some of them are contradictory. Some of the spirits they're coming from all different places and all different walks of life, because anybody who was a human being on the earth after they die becomes a spirit somewhere in the spirit world. And so you have, the spirit of Einstein, and then you have the spirit of the local crackhead. And the spiritualist, and this is my biggest critique of the spiritualist movement, such as not anybody specifically, but a lot of this channeled material, is they take the words of one spirit that they happen to find, and they treat it as gospel. They think this is absolutely true, 100%, because it came from the spirit world. Well, what Allan Kardec found essentially was that spirits are at all different levels of evolution, both morally and intellectually, and some of them are very wise and know a lot of things. Some of them are extremely ignorant and don't know very much. And then there's everything in between as well. So he essentially came up with a system for how to categorize that, and how to analyze and evaluate the spirit communications that he was getting, to say, okay, we're gonna value this, and of course comparing them against each other too, right? So if you can tell when you're talking to a person who is fairly wise versus a person who's, let's say, the opposite of that. You can usually tell, right? And so he figured out, okay, well, we got all these communications from the wise spirits. What are the themes in common? And so basically made a whole study of this, and was got some very interesting results. It's kind of impossible to summarize because there's so much to it, but Like Julio alluded to, there's religious implications, there's scientific implications, there's philosophical implications. And one of the philosophies that these spirits all taught, that came up over and over and over again, was that of reincarnation. So, to go back to that subject, which I wanted to, because I thought, we went over like kind of the logic of reincarnation and the philosophy, but it'd be interesting to talk about, why do we actually believe that that's true? Like, aside from, it's the most reasonable explanation, which I agree with. But apart from that, sometimes things happen in life that appear to be completely unreasonable. So maybe is there more evidence than just that it's reasonable?
Two out of things. One, we should choose to see which one reconciles of what we know of God. So either there is
let me stop you right there for a second.
Yes.
How do we know anything about God? What are we using as our basis for that?
That's a very good question. So, for example, I could look at this phone, and I know this phone is not a creator. This phone is actually a creation. And by looking at this phone, there are so many different things that I could find out about the creator of this phone. First of all, I would say that whoever built this phone, it's a very smart individual. This phone knows, this person knows about engineering. This person knows about electronics. This person knows about communication. This person knows about aesthetics. Obviously, it's not a person who created the phone. It's many different teams. But by looking at the creation, you might have an idea of the creator. So when we look at nature, when we look at the universe, and when you look at the latest pictures of the James Webb telescope and how it's rocking the foundations of astronomy right now, and there are so many different concepts in science that that lead people to conclude of a supreme being of some sort. Unfortunately, whenever we are having these conversations and we are forced to use language that is compromised with religion tradition, there are individuals who immediately after listening to those words, they will throw the baby with the baby water. And our suggestion is, please just throw the dirty water out, keep the baby, listen to the information. So what you have in astronomy, for example, is the concept of fine tuning. And there are many astrophysicists, Chris, who became believers. Now, they are not believer in Christ or Allah. It's not your traditional book Bible God, but it's some intelligence of some sort. And this was not through tradition. This was actually through their studies, because they found out that it is impossible for the universe to happen by accident, that all the fine forces that results in the fine-tuning argument could not have caused by chance for many different reasons. One of them, it's time alone. If you put the age of the universe, which is about 13.5 billion years, and you allow these forces to evolve naturally for them to work together, it wouldn't happen. Then on the biological level, you have all the creation of proteins, the combinations of different amino acids in order to form the cell. And even if we had more time than 13.7 billion years of time to have these amino acids come up together by natural causes, it wouldn't happen. Life will be impossible. So you have these scientists who are looking at the data, and the data is clearly telling them that our explanation does not suffice. Obviously, our argument is not the God of the gap argument. If we don't know something, it's God. That's not it. However, at the fine tuning, for example, the desperate need to find a explanation that removes a supreme intelligence out of the equation have led scientists to conclude something that is impossible to be proven, which is the multiverse theory.
And when you say just a second. When you say the desperate need, what do you mean, like a psychological need?
Well, if you're trying to find a cause, because nothingness cannot create something. That is the basic premise. How can
Right.
nothingness, absolute void, can create something? So you must have an explanation where the stuff came from. So the
Right.
desperate need to find a cause have led certain astrophysicists to claim that we have the multiverse out there. A multiverse means that there's something that's creating different universes, and our universe just happens to have the right combination for life to happen. You know, you have to be a much big
That's
believer
good luck. Yeah.
in impossible things than an actually supreme being. Obviously, I truly believe that these individuals who completely discard the notion of the possibility of a supreme being, it's because the alternative that has given to them, it's also something that does not reconcile with what they see. For example, people
Right.
claim that Jesus Christ is God. And you look at our earth, you know, which is like a little small dot, you know, a piece of dust in comparison to the entire universe. And to claim an individual came here and that individual is God himself, not to mention that Christ himself never said, I am God. These were his followers after him who told him that, you know, he was God. This was a old tradition religion of always portraying God into three entities: the Holy Spirit, Christ, and God. So this comes from Hinduism, you know, Vishnu, Krishna, and Brahmana, and always into three gods. So the God that the Spiritist philosophy talks about, first of all, it does not claim to know what God is. It simply claims it exists. It's not a he, it's not a she. It's a it that we don't know what it is. So in the Spirit's book, which is a book composed of 1,019 questions, the first question of the book is, what is God? The question is not, who is God? Because that question alone leads you to think that God must be a he or a she. So
Right.
God is not in any shape or form anthropomorphic, similar to us in form, in thinking, or emotions. So it's a it. And the answer is, God is the supreme intelligence of the universe, the first cause of all things. So it's a definition that does not tell us the nature of what God is. And Christ, in the Spiritist philosophy, it's a highly evolved entity who came to show us what is the path for us to follow to create our happiness. And we can summarize his teaching into one single sentence: do unto others as you wish others do unto you. So then we go back to our initial argument. If I inflict pain on other people, I'm inflicting pain on myself, because what I do to others come back to me. And this is why it's so good to do good, because the good I do to others also comes back to me. So as you can see, we are constantly in control of our destiny through the things we do towards other people.
Right. Okay. Okay. So that makes sense. And it reminds me of that first verse of the book of John too, where he says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I learned recently that the translation of the word is logos in Greek, which doesn't exactly mean word. That's one of many possible translations, but a better translation might be the intelligence. Like in the beginning was the intelligence, and the intelligence was God, which jives very well with I believe the Spirit's book. In the beginning says that God is the intelligent principle of the universe.
And it's very interesting that you say this, because, you know, there are many individuals who I watch and I admire their work, like Jordan Peterson. He put together a group of scholars to discuss the 5 books of the Bible. Then you have Dan Sprager, you have Ben Shapiro. You know, these are individuals who talk about the Bible as a great source of knowledge, and no one is actually questioning that. But obviously, when it comes to the Bible, there are many different interpretations that one can give. And if one gives the interpretation that we only have one single lifetime, we constantly get into situations that we will contradict ourselves, or we will lower the standards of God, because we cannot keep the attributes of God as it is with the explanations that we give of life. You know, when you see the Bible through the lenses of one single existence, you know, we're born, we live, and then we die, then we are constantly running into contradictions, and God is a partial being who likes certain people and dislikes other people. God inflicts pain, and God is jealous, and God is angry. And what we have read is that we have been created in God's image. But unfortunately, what we have done throughout history, we have created God in our image. So we are jealous people, and we project our jealousy onto God. You know, we get very angry, and then we project our anger onto God. We are inflicted with ingratitude. Ingratitude becomes a great source of unhappiness, and then we project these emotions onto God. And the more we put of us on God, less God is. Now, through the lenses of reincarnation, that completely changes. We don't know what God is. We know it's a supreme entity. We have our model to be copied, Christ, and other religious models as well. But through the Spiritist philosophy, Christ is definitely the highest we have received. And it's our duty and it's our mission, this is why we're born, to develop ourselves intellectually and morally. And another very good knowledge that we get from the Spiritist philosophy, Chris, it's the fact that, you know, in science, you strictly learn about the evolution of the body. The whole movement that began with Charles Darwin and his publication of The Origin of the Species in 1861. It's interesting that the publication of the Spirit's book, it's 1857, which predates Charles Darwin's book and talks so much about evolution. But unfortunately, Charles Darwin, due to his context, he was forced to limit his interpretation of the evolution of the body alone. But through the Spiritist philosophy, we are aware that not only the body evolves, but also the entity who is driving that body, the soul, the spirit, the mind, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
So what you have, it's a double evolution, the evolution of the body and the evolution of the spirit. And one has an influence on the other.
Yeah, I really like that. I thought that was an excellent way of like, it's a third explanation, because when I was growing up, it was atheistic evolution, that everything happened just by accident, and everything that came together is just one giant accident, which is just, it defies reason completely. I never believed that for a second. I always thought that was ridiculous. And then on the other side is this that God created everything in 6 days, and there is the kind of theistic evolution where, oh, evolution is a biological process, but God gave it some pokes every here and there and helped it along, which I've never really thought very convincing either. But the Spiritist argument is that everything has a spiritual principle, and that the spiritual principle is what evolves, and the spiritual principle is the blueprint for the physical thing that is the manifestation of that spiritual principle. And so this like idea of natural evolution, that things just like genes mutate and planets explode, and this just like everything is some natural process, it doesn't make sense, because natural processes tend towards disorder, not towards order. But if it's a spiritual process, and the spiritual process tends towards order, and the biological process or the material process is just a reflection of the spiritual process, then that would tend to order, and that would make sense. That would be like in my opinion, a logical explanation for evolution, where it was, in my opinion, completely missing before.
What amazes me about these conversations, Chris, it's the fact that someone who is a biologist listening to our conversation will hear some of these buzzwords, spirit, evolution, and completely disregard what we're talking about. Yet, we are advancing so much in technology that we are able to have the ability to manipulate genes. It's still very limited, but imagine 100 years from now, and 200 years from now, and 300 years from now, how much are we able to actually manipulate genes in order to perfect, this physical machine, our body? And that's exactly the argument of the Spiritist philosophy. These highly evolved entities, they manipulate our genes in order to, for the thinking being, the energy, the spirit, if you want to call it, to habitate in a body that is accordance to its intellectual and spiritual evolution. So what you have there, it's a process of natural selection with also spiritual intervention. Now, I know they're going to hear the word spiritual. That's it. I don't want to hear this conversation anymore. But, that's what we're doing right now. We are intervening in with gene manipulation in order to avoid diseases from the get-go and have a more perfected body. So I don't know why the resistance, like I said, if you're one of those out there who resist this kind of knowledge just because you're hearing these buzzwords, throw the baby water out, but keep the baby, keep the information, because, you will eventually leave your body through the process of death. And it's not the body, it's not you dying, it's your machine. And there is so much to learn, so much to grow. And it's always a good practice to keep an open mind and disassociate ourselves from the baggage, from the cultural baggage that these words bring, but keep the information, analyze the information, because that's exactly what we're doing right now. There's another astrophysicist that I like very much, Mikio Kaku. And this guy, in his book, I forgot the title, has something to do with future. He talks about that right now, there are individuals, he's not using the word spirit, but let's use the word mind. These individuals are traveling through space from one planet to another, just the same way we upload and download information from the internet. And the only reason we don't perceive them is just because our technology is still dumb enough not to detect them. All these arguments are there in the Spirit's book. But obviously, because of the context, it's using the nomenclature that brings the religious baggage with it and throws people's off. But I would like people to give a chance, because it's definitely a radical way of looking at these old age problems through a new perspective.
Right, absolutely. And I like, I mean, it seems like we're in America, especially, we're kind of like polarized into one of three camps. It's either like you're a science person, you're a religion person, or you're a spirituality person. And they don't really like each other very much. Right? Like the spirituality people see the science people and the religious people as like closed-minded and rigid, and the religious people see the spiritualists as Satanists, and that the the science people as kind of unconscious Satanists, and then the materialists, the science people, they see the other two is like nonsensical woo-woo people. Where, in my opinion, I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by that. I think the three should be perfectly integrated. It's honestly, it's kind of weird, especially that religion and spirituality have been separated. That, like, spirituality is the essence of religion. Why would you let that be separated? I like to say that in the US specifically, that the Christianity has become like one step away from atheism. They're so, and this is what I grew up with. They're so in kind of desperate, because the culture, like the dominant culture is the atheist scientism, as opposed to science, right? Because science is open-minded, right? Science is looking for proof of new things that it didn't think of before, right? Whereas the scientism is that, well, we have this science, it's pretty much complete, and anything that's outside of it, we're just going to reject as woo-woo. So I kind of forgot where I was going with that.
To the extent that scientists themselves, they say that sometimes in order for science to evolve, some scientists have to die.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because people are so rigid and they get stuck in their ways, including the science. And it's funny that they do exactly the same thing that they criticize the religious people of doing. Like the scientism becomes its own sort of religion.
Yes, unfortunately. And in order for integration to happen, which what you're proposing between these three ways of looking at life, much psychological maturity needs to take place. And psychological maturity requests that we make an effort to understand how the other person sees things and how they interpret things. For example, the Bible. If one consider the job of a father with a child, a father will try to help the child make the best of themselves, but the language that the father is using, it's appropriate for the child's intellect. So many of the things that we look at the Bible, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but it's in a language that was given because of our psychological and intellectual infancy. So therefore, the language is given that way. So it's not supposed to be taken literally, but it's full of symbols. And if we have the psychological maturity, the right interpretation, one can extract so much good knowledge from those symbols. But unfortunately, when people become rigid in their interpretation, which what happened with the Catholic Church, and I'm not belittling the Catholic Church, the infallibility of the Pope and all that back in the 1800s. I'm just making a historical analysis. That led to many scientists completely throw the baby water with the baby. Look what the Catholic Church did with Bruno Giordano. Bruno Giordano had the insight, about our galaxy. The stars were not just, lights in the sky, but there were suns that were far, far away from us. This is why we saw them as stars. What did the Catholic Church did with Bruno Giordano? It burned him at the stake. And why? Well, because the Catholic Church had a set of rules that everyone should abide to. And if anyone would question just one of those rules, all the other rules will also be questionable. So what are we supposed to do? If anyone asks us, if anyone makes us be questionable, let's burn him, let's burn her. Joan of Arc, all these individuals who unfortunately suffered because of those rigid thinkings. And that led to a whole different way of treating science. Isaac Newton, these individuals, the grandparents of the modern science movement, they were very prone to thinking of a higher entity. They through their science, they were looking to understand how God thought. But unfortunately, through the abuses of the Catholic Church, we got to the point we're here today, in which we have this branch of thinking, which is science, another branch of thinking, which is religion. And when they oppose each other, unfortunately, it produces a wave of atheists. And this is where I am very, very concerned with young people who go to college and they become materialists just because of what they are preached, literally preached in science. Because what happens today, Chris, in another front of science, for example, in the topic of evolution, you have individuals who are the forerunners of evolution science that they disregard Charles Darwin. He said what they say is that the mechanisms for natural selection does not produce the new body forms. It's a complex subject, but basically it's impossible to have what we have today, the organisms that we have today, which are very complex, through the process of natural selection. So they are definitely looking for different theories to explain this. And maybe they will find, they will eventually contact the spiritual realm. And I'm sorry, I'm digressing here, but we are trying to perfect our ability to communicate. And since the spiritual realm where spirits are right now, we are in the physical plane, and this physical plane is inside the spiritual plane. And the spiritual plane is not a belief, but rather a physical reality as well. And as we progress with our technology, eventually we will detect the spiritual realm through our instruments. And that will be an age in which no longer the afterlife becomes a religious quest, a religious belief, but rather a scientific fact, because we have found it. And people don't know this, but there were many scientists who were engaged in this kind of work in the early 1900s.
Right.
One of them was actually someone who developed the theory of evolution with Charles Darwin, an English scientist. I forgot his name right now. It will come back to me. But very prominent, very special, very intelligent, very respected individuals of that era who study the afterlife, not from a religious perspective, but from a scientific perspective. Unfortunately, World War I came in and all that went away, but they were engaged. These were not people who were seeing themselves as three bodies of philosophy, but rather integrated scientists, philosophers with ethical consequences to their thinking, which is what we call religion.
Right, and it seems like that sort of science was.
I'm sorry,
common.
I just remember his name, Alfred Russel Wallace. That was the co-creator of the theory of evolution, Alfred Russel Wallace.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting to me to read about science from the turn of the century, because it was common knowledge back then, right? It was commonly accepted that there was a realm of causes and a realm of effects, and that the people had animal magnetism between them, and these things just kind of fell out of favor, and I'm not quite sure why. That would be an interesting study. I suspect it has to do with the money, right? The people that science follows where it gets funding, and so if the people that are giving the money decide to stop studying a particular subject, then it just fades away from the public consciousness.
I mean, from the 1800 religious revolution that was taking place and the infallibility of the Pope, what does that mean? The Pope declared himself to be infallible. What that means is that none of his teachings can ever be questioned or wrong. Right.
What could go wrong with that?
So here you have a group of individuals who are saying the only source of truth and all the truth is this book called the Bible. And then you have scientists who are looking at the facts found in nature. So if the religious people had the humility to say to themselves, you know what, this book is definitely a great source of wisdom, is a guide for our lives, but it was written so many years ago, and certain teachings was actually for those people at that context. So we have to revise some of our interpretation. And instead of taking some of this stuff literally, we should look at the symbols. What are symbols? Symbols are messages to be decoded. So if they were humble enough to actually look at the same book and say, here we have, there are certain teachings here that should not be taken literally, especially teachings that has to do with creation. Can you imagine, for example, Moses 3,500 years ago, trying to explain to the Israelites recently released from the hands of the Egyptians, never seen a book in their lives, completely illiterate. They are wandering in the desert. And here he comes with an explanation of how the earth was created. he would say, well, the what you see here is a star. It's a third generation star, and that star, its last explosion, it became this disk of dust, and through gravitational forces, it created this new solar system, and we have 8 planets. These people will look at him and say, this guy just lost it. let's stone him to death. He's just crazy. Well, he had to give the teachings of creation according to the knowledge of the people that was receiving, and
Right.
there's much of symbolism there. So I think the science took this completely materialistic approach because of how the religious people hold on to these beliefs and interpretation that was so rigid, that forced the scientists to walk away from religion altogether. And that's where the mistake lies. Because when it comes to moral teachings, there's not much to be interpreted. To love one another is to love one another. To not inflict pain on someone else is not to inflict pain on someone else. So when it comes to moral teachings, there are little to be interpreted. It's more of the natural teachings. The Bible try to explain natural occurrences. So what the Spiritist philosophy says, that science has the goal to seek the truth through experimentation. And religion in general seeks the truth through revelation. And eventually the experimentation will prove the revelation. But they're definitely complementary to one another, because our goal is to develop ourselves intellectually, to become smart people, and to become good people, morally upright people.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And yeah, it doesn't, I mean, when you think about it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's like, oh, that guy is a jerk, so I'm not going to believe anything that he believes, right? I'm just going to say, oh, he believes that this guy believes that the world is round, and he was mean to me, so therefore I believe the earth was flat. Like, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but it kind of goes back to what you're saying about psychological maturity, that the people that are the religious leaders and the scientists and the spiritual leaders and the spirits themselves, for that matter, are all subject to, are all responding to things at their various levels of psychological maturity. And there could be somebody that's intellectually brilliant, but doesn't really make very good choices. And probably most of us know a person like that that's highly intelligent, but makes pretty crappy choices with their life. And you wonder, like, well, why is that? And so I think that's like a lot of the problem with science, is that you have people that are intellectually very advanced, but morally or psychologically maybe not so much, and maybe not very skilled at self-reflection. That, plus the fact that I believe, especially now, that every center of influence in society is heavily influenced by corrupting influences, right? Science now has become the national religion, basically. And so the people that want to control the mind and control the populations, well, they go through science, and they put these scientist figureheads that in many cases stopped being scientists decades ago and have become full-time propagandists, and they tell you what to believe about science. The same way that they infiltrate the religions and try to tell you what to believe about religion. And yes, spirituality too. I fully believe that there are spiritual teachers out there that are working for ulterior motives. And so it's very difficult to kind of figure out what to believe in this environment. But the best place to start, in my opinion, is just being willing to question everything, including the things that you were brought up to believe was absolutely true as a child. If you are an adult and you're, it may make some sense to think, okay, well, I've always believed that this thing was true because my parents told me it was true, and my school teachers told me it was true, and the pastors and MTV or whoever told me it was true. But is it really? Right. And I think that's a level of courage that not that many people have, because it's almost like, I mean, to be willing to question your most fundamental beliefs is almost like questioning your own identity in a way.
Yes, you're 100% about that. This is why people are staunch defenders of their belief, because
Right.
it's not just an aspect of their life you're questioning, it's how they live
Yeah.
that is questionable. So, uh, um,
And their
uh,
tribal identity too, right? I mean, if you think about like the easy example is the Scientologist who leaves the church. Um, there, and this is not a like criticism of Scientology exactly, just saying that, you know, if you have this tribe of people who are your friends and your family and the people that you love and that love you, and that they all think the same way, and then all of a sudden you leave, or you leave their thinking pattern, well, you're putting yourself in a very difficult situation. You're almost like risking being alienated by everybody around you. So it takes a lot of courage, and not that many people are willing to take that risk.
well, going back to what you said, that we are questioning someone's life, not just their belief when we question their belief. I was
Mm-hmm.
listening to an interview with the great Thomas Sowell, and then he was asked, have you tried to convince the people from the other spectrum of your ideas? And he said, he mentioned a different individual who is very known, and he said that individual probably makes 10 times more than I do. And how do you convince someone to make 90% less of what they do? That was his answer. That was
Right.
great. Because many of our belief system is based on our lifestyle, and that involves money as well. Unfortunately,
Oh
what you
yeah.
mentioned before, there are certain spiritual leaders that have made a career out of their spiritual beliefs. So for them to consider something else is to question their lifestyle, their lavish lifestyle. And that's where the general public make the mistake of associating that individual with all religions around the world, and once again throw the baby with the dirty baby water. It's a mistake to do. It would be the equivalent to say science is no good because through nuclear energy we have dropped 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It
Right.
would be the same kind of belief, of assumption and decision
Yeah.
based on one single occurrence in history. What we have to consider is that atheists and spiritualists and spiritual people, we need to be good to one another. Um, we need to help one another. We need to evolve. Be aware of sick, uh, uh, evil people. Once again, evil on the spiritist philosophy perspective, it's not someone who was created evil, it's someone who's temporarily evil. Be aware of these individuals. They are in different positions we see out there, including social engineers. You were mentioning before, of individuals who want to control us, with what we want to believe through what we watch and through what we hear. And people don't realize that you have civil engineers who make bridges and roads, and you have electrical engineers who make appliances, and there are social engineers. These individuals are there to manipulate the majority of us in one way of thinking. And as the world, as old as it is, one very efficient technique to keep us all under control is to actually put us against each other, to divide and conquer. So, I'm speaking to all scientists, atheists, materialists. We all need to be good to one another. And through the spiritist perspective, I'm giving you a philosophical understanding why, explanation why. And the reason being, it's because the bad that I do to you, Chris, that comes back to me. It comes back to me in moments that we call bad luck. There's no such a thing as good luck or bad luck. We are in control through our actions. The good that I do to you, that will return to me as well. And with that, I guide my thoughts, my words, and my actions to always bring the best to me and to avoid pain for myself. And that goes back to our initial argument. And anything that it's left unresolved, unfinished business, I'll have to face it on my next reincarnation, either through a poor beginning, through difficulties of some sort, which is not punishment, but rather a path of redemption, a path to make amends for my past mistakes.
Excellent. Well, I think that is the perfect note to finish off on. So,
I agree.
So anybody listening to this, put in the comments like what, because for me this conversation brought up like 1,000 other questions that I didn't have time to ask, and would have brought it a whole bunch of different ways. Probably it was for you guys that are listening too. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and they might even end up as subjects of future videos. So just one final thing, Julio, where do people find out more about you?
They could go onto our YouTube page, spiritismtalks.com. They could do that. And in reference to the comments, please, we are very open to criticism, but we just ask for your criticism to be rational. Just to call us names, and that doesn't do anything for you or for us. Criticize us if it's going to be negative, but constructively. Present a different argument.
Right.
Just to say something that it's bad, it's useless. It doesn't explain anything. For one to criticize, we should be doing something equal or better of in order to contribute to the conversation. That's what we ask, but please make your comments.
Absolutely agreed. Any last thoughts before we close out here?
This conversation, Chris, was very productive, and I hope we have many of them. Obviously, we cannot interpret what life is all about in an hour and 15 minutes, but I hope that we have left good topics and good seeds for future conversations to come.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here, Julio. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I will talk to you very soon.
See you, my friend.
Okay. I want to